The scream that tore from Grace Zimmerman's throat echoed across the dusty plains of Texas. But no one came running to help because everyone in the settlement of Camp Verde already knew better than to interfere with Jacob Zimmerman's business. Grace pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of the barn, her green eyes wide with terror as her husband's shadow fell across her small frame, his hand raised for another blow that would surely leave marks hidden beneath her long sleeves and high collar. She was 22 years old and had been married for 3 years that felt like 30, each day bleeding into the next in a cycle of fear and silent prayers that went unanswered. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made Jacob pause, his bloodshot eyes narrowing as he turned toward the main road, and Grace seized the moment to slip past him and into the barn's shadowy interior, where she could hide among the hay bales and pretend to be invisible until his rage passed. The rider who had interrupted her husband's fury was a stranger to Camp Verde, a tall man astride a chestnut mare whose coat gleamed even under the dust of long travel. Grace watched through a crack in the barn wall as Jacob straightened his vest and smoothed back his thinning hair, transforming his face from monster to respectable businessman in the span of seconds. The stranger dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent more years in a saddle than in a chair, his worn leather chaps and dusty boots marking him as a working cowboy rather than a gentleman rancher. His hat shadowed his features as he approached Jacob with an outstretched hand. "Name's Austin Trent," the stranger said, his voice carrying across the yard in a low rumble that somehow made Grace think of thunder rolling across distant hills. "Heard in town you might be looking for someone to help with your cattle drive next month." Jacob's laugh was too loud, too forced. "Word travels fast. Just got back from San Antonio yesterday with the contract. How'd you know?" Bartender at the saloon mentioned it. "Said you had 200 head you needed moved to market in Fort Worth." Austin Trent shifted his weight and Grace caught a glimpse of his profile. He looked to be somewhere near 30, with strong features weathered by sun and wind, a dark beard trimmed close to his jaw. "I have experience with drives. Worked the Chisholm Trail 3 seasons running." "That's so." Jacob's tone held the calculating edge Grace knew too well. Her husband never did anything that did not benefit himself. "What are your rates?" $40 for the drive plus food and a place to bed down while we prepare." Austin's response was matter of fact, neither apologetic nor aggressive about his price. Grace knew Jacob would try to negotiate lower. She had watched him haggle over everything from flour prices to the cost of new shoes for her, shoes she never got because he always decided she could make do with what she had. But something in Austin Trent's bearing must have warned Jacob against his usual tactics because her husband simply nodded. "Fair enough. You can bed down in the barn starting tonight if you want. My wife will bring you supper." Jacob turned back toward the house, then paused. "Grace, get out here and meet our new hand." Grace's stomach clenched with familiar dread. She hated being paraded in front of strangers, hated the way Jacob watched her interactions with others like a hawk studying prey, but she knew better than to delay. She brushed hay from her dark blue dress and stepped out into the fading afternoon light, keeping her eyes downcast as she had learned to do. "This is my wife, Grace," Jacob announced with the pride of a man showing off a possession. "Grace, this is Austin Trent. He will be staying in the barn and helping with the drive." Grace forced herself to look up just enough to acknowledge the introduction. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Trent." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Madam." Austin touched the brim of his hat, and in that brief moment when their eyes met, Grace saw something that made her breath catch. There was no hunger in his gaze, no calculation or cruelty. just a quiet kindness that seemed completely foreign in her world. Then his eyes dropped to her left cheek, where she knew a bruise was already forming from Jacob's earlier strike, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Grace will show you where to put your things in the barn," Jacob said, already moving toward the house. "I have paperwork to attend to." The silence that fell between them once Jacob disappeared inside was thick with things unspoken. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin she had become, how her dress hung loose where it used to fit properly. She had not been eating well, but that was partly because Jacob controlled the food and partly because fear had a way of stealing appetite. "This way," she managed, turning toward the barn without waiting to see if Austin followed. She could hear his boots against the hard, packed earth, a steady rhythm that somehow did not sound threatening. Inside the barn, she pointed to an empty stall that had been cleaned out. "You can put your bedroll there. There is fresh hay if you need it and a water pump out back." "Thank you, madam." Austin set down his saddlebags but did not move to unpack them. "That is a nice bruise forming. Looks painful." Grace's hand flew to her cheek, heat flooding her face. "I fell. Clumsy of me. Must have been some fall." His tone was neutral, but she heard the disbelief underneath. "Yes, well, I should get started on supper." She turned to flee, desperate to escape those eyes that seemed to see too much. "Madam?" Austin's voice stopped her at the barn door. She looked back reluctantly. "Just so you know, I do not hold with men who hit women. Never have, never will." The words hung in the air like a promise or maybe a threat. Grace could not decide which. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I do not know what you mean, Mr. Trent." "Yes, you do." He said it gently, without accusation. "But I will not press. Just wanted you to know where I stand." Grace fled then, her skirts catching at her ankles as she hurried back to the house. Her hands shook as she built up the fire in the kitchen stove and began preparing beans and salt pork for supper. What did Austin Trent think he was accomplishing with such words? Did he not understand that speaking such things out loud only made situations worse? Jacob would kill her if he thought she had been complaining to strangers about their marriage. A wife's place was to honor her husband, to submit to his authority no matter how harsh that authority might be. That was what the preacher had told her when she married Jacob at 19, still naive enough to believe that a man's courtship behavior reflected his true character. She had learned better within a month of the wedding. When supper was ready, she loaded a plate for Austin and carried it out to the barn. The sun had set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that might have been beautiful if Grace had been able to appreciate such things anymore. She found Austin brushing down his mare, his movements careful and methodical. "I brought your supper," she announced from the doorway. "Kind of you." He set down the brush and came to take the plate from her hands, careful not to let his fingers touch hers. "Will you sit a moment? Or does your husband expect you back immediately? He is reviewing contracts. He will not notice if I am a few minutes." Even as she said it, Grace wondered why she was agreeing. Every instinct screamed at her to run back to the house, to put distance between herself and this man who looked at her with such uncomfortable perception. Austin settled onto a hay bale and gestured to another one nearby. Grace perched on the edge of it, ready to bolt if necessary. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds Austin's eating and the soft shuffle of horses in their stalls. "How long have you been married, if you do not mind my asking?" Austin's question was casual, but Grace sensed layers beneath it. 3 years this past June. And before that? "Did you grow up around Camp Verde?" "No. I was from a small town northeast of here. My father had a farm, but it failed. When he died, my mother was left with debts she could not pay." Grace heard her own voice as if from a distance, flat and emotionless. Jacob offered to settle the debts in exchange for my hand. My mother thought it was a good match. He had money, land, a respectable name. And you, what did you think? No one had ever asked her that before. Grace found herself actually considering the question. I thought I did not have much choice, and Jacob seemed kind enough during courtship. He brought flowers, spoke prettily. I thought perhaps it would not be so bad, but it was. It was not a question. Grace looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. A wife's duty is to her husband. A husband's duty is to cherish his wife, not use her as a punching bag. Austin's voice remained gentle despite the harsh words. Tears burned behind Grace's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned not to cry years ago because tears only made Jacob angrier. You should not speak of such things, Mr. Trent. It is not proper, and if Jacob heard you, he would dismiss you before the drive even began. Maybe so, but proper and right are not always the same thing. He set aside his empty plate and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I lost my mother when I was 12 years old. My father was a drunk who thought his fists were the solution to every problem. I watched him beat her down year after year until she did not have any fight left in her. When she finally died, the doctor said it was pneumonia, but I knew better. She had just given up, stopped wanting to live. I swore then that if I ever saw a man treating a woman the way my father treated my mother, I would not stand silent. Grace's breath caught. I am sorry about your mother, Mr. Trent, truly, but my situation is different. Jacob is my husband. I made vows before God. God did not intend for those vows to be a death sentence. Austin straightened, and his eyes found hers in the dimming light. I am not asking you to do anything, madam. I am just saying that if you ever need help, I am here. That is all. You will be here for a month at most. Then you will move on to the next job, and I will still be Jacob's wife. The bitterness in her own voice surprised Grace. A lot can happen in a month. Before Grace could respond, she heard Jacob calling her name from the house. Panic flooded through her. She stood so quickly she nearly knocked over the hay bale. I have to go. Thank you for speaking with me, Mr. Trent, but please do not say such things again. It only makes everything harder. She grabbed his empty plate and ran back to the house, her heart pounding. Jacob met her at the door, his eyes suspicious. What took you so long? Mr. Trent had questions about when to start work tomorrow and what needed to be done. I was just explaining. The lie came easily after years of practice. Jacob grunted, apparently satisfied. Clean up the kitchen, then come to bed. Grace obeyed, her mind spinning with everything Austin had said. She told herself to forget his words, to stop thinking about the kindness in his eyes or the gentleness in his voice. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless, made you start believing things could be different when they never would be. She had learned that lesson thoroughly over the past 3 years. But that night, as she lay rigid beside Jacob in their bed, pretending to sleep while he snored beside her, Grace found herself thinking about Austin Trent's mother and wondering if she had ever met someone who offered her hope, only to have it snatched away. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the Texas sun already beating down by the time Grace finished preparing breakfast. Jacob expected his meal on the table at 6 sharp, and any delay brought consequences. She had learned to wake at 5, giving herself plenty of time to cook, set the table, and make herself presentable. This morning she also prepared a plate for Austin, though Jacob had not specifically instructed her to do so. Take that out to Trent, Jacob ordered around a mouthful of eggs. Then come back and clean up. I want you to wash all the windows today. They are filthy. Grace nodded and carried the plate across the yard to the barn. The morning air was still relatively cool, and she could hear birds singing in the cottonwood trees that lined the creek bordering their property. Austin was already up, working on repairing a section of fence near the corral. "Good morning, madam," he called when he saw her approaching. "You did not need to bring me breakfast, but I appreciate it. Jacob wanted to make sure you were fed." She set the plate on the corral fence, unwilling to get too close. In the bright morning light, she could see Austin more clearly than she had yesterday. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man who had spent his life doing hard physical labor, but there was a gentleness in the way he moved that contradicted his size. His eyes were brown, she noticed, a warm shade that reminded her of honey. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, and his gaze went to the bruise on her cheek. "Fine, thank you." Grace kept her voice neutral, professional. She had decided during her sleepless night that the best course of action was to maintain strict distance from Austin Trent. Kindness was a luxury she could not afford. "Glad to hear it." He accepted her retreat, did not push. "What needs doing around here? Your husband mentioned preparing for the drive, but I figured I should ask about daily chores too. The cattle are in the south pasture. They need to be checked daily for strays and injuries. The horses need exercising, and there is always fence to mend, equipment to repair." Grace rattled off the list mechanically. "Jacob will give you specific instructions. He does not like me speaking for him." Something flickered across Austin's face, but he only nodded. "Understood." "Thank you for the breakfast, madam." Grace hurried back to the house, relieved to have the interaction over. She spent the rest of the morning washing windows as instructed, her arms aching from reaching and scrubbing. Through the glass, she occasionally caught glimpses of Austin working in the corral or riding out toward the pasture. He moved with a confidence that came from years of experience, handling the horses with firm but gentle hands. Around noon, Jacob rode into the yard and called for Austin. Grace watched from the kitchen window as the two men talked, Jacob gesturing toward the south pasture. Then they both mounted up and rode out together. Grace felt some of the tension leave her shoulders once they were gone. It was easier to breathe when Jacob was not nearby, easier to pretend she was a person rather than a possession. She made herself a small lunch of bread and cheese, eating quickly before returning to her chores. The house was not large, but Jacob insisted it be kept immaculate. Every floor must be swept daily, every surface dusted, every dish washed immediately after use. Grace had learned that cleanliness was one of the few things that kept Jacob's temper somewhat in check. If the house was perfect, if supper was hot and ready on time, if she was quiet and obedient, sometimes he would go days without hitting her sometimes. The afternoon stretched long and hot. Grace finished the windows and moved on to mending Jacob's shirts, her needle flashing in and out of the fabric with practiced precision. She had always been good with her hands, had once enjoyed sewing and embroidery. Now it was just another task on an endless list. She heard the men return as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Through the open window, she caught fragments of their conversation. "Need to cull about 15 head that are not fit for the drive," Austin was saying. "The rest look good, strong and healthy." "We will do the culling tomorrow," Jacob replied. "I want them sold off before we leave. No point feeding cattle we cannot use." Grace started preparing supper, her hands moving automatically through the familiar routine. When it was ready, she set the table for two and called Jacob from his office. He came immediately, settled into his chair, and began eating without a word to her. Grace stood by the stove, waiting for permission to eat her own portion. "Trent seems competent enough," Jacob announced between bites. "Says we will need at least 2 more men for the drive. I suppose he is right, though I hate the added expense." "Will you hire locally?" Grace asked, then immediately regretted speaking without being addressed first. Jacob's eyes snapped to her, cold and assessing. "Did I ask for your opinion?" "No, sir, I apologize. You should." He returned to his food and Grace released the breath she had been holding. "But since you ask, yes, I will hire from town. Trent suggested a couple names. We will see if they are available." After Jacob finished eating and retreated to his office, Grace quickly ate her own small portion and then prepared a plate for Austin. The routine was establishing itself already. Breakfast, lunch, and supper for the cowboy who had wandered into their lives with his gentle words and dangerous kindness. She found him grooming his mare in the barn, the same careful attention to detail she had noticed before. He looked up when she entered, and a smile touched his lips. "You are going to spoil me with all this service, madam. It is no trouble." Grace set the plate down and turned to leave, but Austin's voice stopped her. "Wait, please, if you can spare a moment." Everything in Grace screamed at her to refuse, to maintain the distance she had promised herself. But something in his tone made her pause. "What is it, Mr. Trent?" "Austin, please call me Austin." He set down the brush and faced her fully. "I wanted to apologize if I made you uncomfortable yesterday. That was not my intent." "You did not." The lie felt transparent even as she spoke it. "I think I did, and I am sorry for that." He leaned against the stall door, his posture relaxed and non-threatening. "But I am not sorry for what I said, just for how it made you feel." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture she could not help. "Mr. Trent, Austin, you seem like a good man, but you do not understand my life or my situation. You have been here less than 2 days. You cannot possibly know what would help and what would only make things worse. You are right. I do not know everything. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard." Austin's voice remained gentle, patient. "I know that you flinch when your husband raises his voice. I know you have bruises you try to hide. I know you look like you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and have forgotten what it feels like to smile." Tears threatened again, burning hot behind Grace's eyes. "What do you want from me? Confession? Gratitude? I cannot give you either. My life is what it is." "I have made my peace with it." "Have you? Because you do not look very peaceful to me." He straightened, took a step closer, then stopped when she instinctively backed away. "I am not trying to force anything, Grace. I just want you to know that you deserve better than this, better than him." "Deserve?" Grace laughed, a bitter sound that hurt her own ears. "What does deserve have to do with anything? Life is not about what we deserve, it is about what we endure. It does not have to be. For you, maybe, you are a man. You can ride where you want, work where you want, leave when you want. I am a woman with no money, no family, no options. Even if I could leave Jacob, where would I go? What would I do? How would I survive?" The words poured out of her in a rush, years of suppressed frustration and hopelessness finally finding voice. "You think I have not thought about leaving. You think I have not lain awake at night planning escape routes and new lives. But thinking and doing are different things, Mr. Trent. Thinking is safe. Doing gets you killed." Austin absorbed her outburst without flinching, his expression thoughtful. "You are right that it is harder for women. The world is not fair that way, but it is not impossible. I have known women who left bad situations and built new lives for themselves. It takes courage and help, but it can be done." "Well, I must not have enough courage then." Grace turned away, unable to bear the understanding in his eyes. "Thank you for the conversation, but I really must get back to the house." This time Austin let her go without another word. Grace practically ran across the yard, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. Anger, fear, hope, despair, all tangled together until she could not separate one from another. She cleaned up the supper dishes with shaking hands, scrubbing the plates harder than necessary. How dare Austin Trent walk into her life and act like he understood anything about her situation? How dare he offer her hope like it was something simple and easy to grasp? He would be gone in a month, off to his next job, his next adventure, while she remained trapped in this house with a man who saw her as property to be used and discarded at will. And yet there was something seductive about Austin's words, something that made the locked doors in her heart rattle on their hinges. What if he was right? What if there was a way out? What if she did not have to endure this for the rest of her life? Grace shook her head, physically trying to dislodge the dangerous thoughts. She could not afford to think this way. Hope was a luxury for people with options, and she had none. The sooner she accepted that, the sooner she stopped listening to Austin Trent's gentle words, the better off she would be. But that night, lying in bed beside Jacob, Grace found herself thinking about what it would be like to live without fear. To wake up in the morning and not immediately calculate the mood of the man beside her, trying to predict whether the day would bring violence or merely coldness. To eat a meal without waiting for permission. To speak without weighing every word for potential offense. To exist as something more than an object. The thoughts followed her into troubled dreams where she rode across open plains on a chestnut mare, the wind in her hair and freedom stretching endlessly before her. The next week fell into a rhythm that was both comforting and unsettling in its normality. Grace maintained her household duties while Jacob and Austin worked on preparing for the cattle drive. 2 more cowboys were hired from town, rough men named Pete and Sam who treated Grace with the cautious respect given to the boss's wife. They bedded down in the barn with Austin and took their meals from plates Grace prepared and left on the corral fence, avoiding any direct interaction. Austin, however, seemed to seek out moments to talk with Grace, brief conversations that left her feeling exposed and understood in equal measure. He never again brought up her situation directly, but his presence itself was a constant reminder that someone saw her, really saw her, and cared about what they saw. "Morning, Grace," he greeted her one day as she brought out breakfast. Somewhere during the week, they had dropped the formalities of Mr. Trent and Madam, sliding into an easy familiarity that both frightened and comforted her. "You look tired. Did you sleep poorly?" The casual concern in his voice nearly undid her. When was the last time anyone had asked about her well-being and actually cared about the answer? "I am fine, thank you. Just a long night." Jacob kept you up with his business talk again. Austin had a way of fishing for information without seeming to pry. Something like that. She did not mention that Jacob had been in one of his moods the night before, angry about the cost of hiring the extra hands, taking out his frustration with rough handling and cruel words. The bruises were on her arms and shoulders this time, easily hidden beneath her dress. The cattle seemed to be coming along well. Austin accepted the change of subject gracefully. "They are in good shape. Your husband knows how to manage a herd, I will give him that. We should be ready to move out on schedule. 3 more weeks." Grace said it without thinking, then caught herself. 3 weeks, until Austin would leave and take with him the small spark of hope his presence had kindled. 3 weeks, Austin echoed, and something in his tone suggested he was thinking the same thing she was. "Grace, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no without any offense given." She tensed, waiting. "When we head out on the drive, Jacob mentioned he is going along to see the cattle all the way to market. He said you would be staying here alone for the 2 weeks we are gone." Austin's eyes searched her face. "Are you all right with that, being here by yourself?" The question surprised her. "Why would I not be?" "Because alone means no one watching you, no one controlling your movements. It means freedom, even if temporary." He paused. "It also means no protection if anyone comes around causing trouble. Grace had not thought that far ahead, had not allowed herself to consider what Jacob's absence might mean. 2 weeks alone. 2 weeks to sleep without fear, to eat when she was hungry, to move through the house without calculating every step to avoid conflict. The prospect was dizzying. "I will be fine," she managed. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, but if I needed help, I could ride there. Can you shoot?" "What? A gun? Can you shoot one?" "For protection." Grace shook her head. "Jacob never taught me. He said women had no business with firearms." Austin's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "If you want, I could teach you before we leave. Basic skills enough to defend yourself if needed. It would give me peace of mind knowing you were not here completely defenseless." The offer hung between them, weighted with implications that went beyond simple gun safety. If Grace accepted, it would mean spending time alone with Austin, time that could be dangerous to her carefully maintained emotional distance. But the practical side of her brain argued that knowing how to handle a weapon was simple common sense, especially for a woman who would be alone on an isolated ranch for 2 weeks. "I would appreciate that," she heard herself say, "if you have time to teach me." Austin's smile was warm and genuine. "I will make time. How about this afternoon when the others are in town getting supplies? We can practice away from the house where the noise will not carry." "All right." Grace felt the flutter of something that might have been excitement or might have been terror. This afternoon. True to his word, Austin found her after lunch when Jacob and the other hands had ridden into Camp Verde. Grace had changed into her oldest dress, knowing that shooting practice would likely be dirty work. She met Austin by the barn, and he handed her a pistol that felt heavy and foreign in her hand. "This is a Colt revolver," he explained, his voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher. 6 shots before you need to reload. It has a kick, so you need to be prepared for that. First thing is to learn how to hold it properly." He moved behind her, his hands guiding hers into the correct position. Grace's breath caught at the closeness, at the warmth of his body behind hers, and the gentle strength of his fingers adjusting her grip. This was the closest she had been to a man besides Jacob in 3 years, and the difference was startling. Where Jacob's touch always carried the threat of violence, Austin's touch was careful, respectful, asking permission even as he helped her. "Like this," he murmured, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "Firm but not rigid. Let the gun be an extension of your arm." They spent the next hour with him teaching her the basics. How to aim, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. Grace's first few shots went wild, the recoil startling her despite Austin's warnings. But gradually she found her rhythm, began to feel more confident with the weight of the weapon in her hands. "You are a natural," Austin praised as she hit 3 tin cans in a row from 20 paces. "Better than some cowboys I have known." Grace felt a flush of pride at the compliment. When was the last time anyone had praised her for anything? "It is easier than I expected. I thought I would be frightened of it. Knowledge usually makes things less frightening." Austin retrieved the cans and set them up again. "Fear comes from not knowing, not understanding. Once you understand how something works, you can control it." Grace wondered if he was still talking about guns or if the conversation had shifted to something deeper. She took aim again, fired, and watched another can spin off the fence post. "Do you think that is true for everything?" "That understanding leads to control. Not everything. Some things we cannot control no matter how well we understand them." Austin moved to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "But we can control how we respond. We can choose not to be victims even when circumstances try to make us into one." There it was again, that gentle prodding toward self-determination, toward the idea that she had choices even when it felt like she had none. Grace lowered the gun, her hands trembling slightly. "You make it sound so simple." "I know it is not simple, but that does not mean it is impossible." Austin reached out and carefully took the gun from her hands, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. "Grace, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Her heart began to race. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about your situation a lot this past week, more than I probably should, given that it is none of my business." He set the gun aside and turned to face her fully. "But I cannot stop thinking about it, about you, about what your life must be like." "Austin, please do not." Grace took a step back, panic rising. "Whatever you are about to say, do not. It will only make things harder. Harder than living with a man who beats you. Harder than being so scared all the time that you have forgotten what it is like to feel safe." His voice was intense, but not angry, passionate, but not threatening. "I do not think anything I could say would make your life harder than it already is." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks before she could stop them. "You do not understand. Jacob would kill me if he thought I was having this conversation with you. He would kill you too. Let him try." Austin's hands clenched at his sides. "I am not afraid of your husband, Grace. And you should not have to be either. But I am. I am terrified of him, and I am terrified of you, and I am terrified of these feelings that I should not be having." The confession burst from her like water from a broken dam. "You have been here barely a week, and already you have turned my world upside down. You make me think about things I should not think about, hope for things I cannot have. Do you know what that does to me? Do you know how dangerous that is?" Austin took a careful step toward her, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I am sorry for causing you fear. That was never my intention, but I am not sorry for making you hope. Everyone deserves hope, Grace. Everyone deserves the possibility of something better. Hope is a luxury I cannot afford." Grace wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces that were threatening to shatter. "Please, Austin, please stop being kind to me. Stop looking at me like I matter. Stop making me feel like I am worth something. I cannot bear it." "You do matter. You are worth something, worth everything." He closed the distance between them and, moving slowly enough to give her time to retreat, reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "And I cannot stop being kind to you any more than I can stop the sun from rising. It is not something I am choosing to do. It is just who I am." Grace stood frozen under his touch, torn between the desire to lean into his gentleness and the need to protect herself from the inevitable pain that would come from accepting it. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Nothing you are not willing to give." "No, that is not quite true." Austin's smile was sad and tender at once. "I want you to be safe. I want you to be happy. I want you to have the life you deserve instead of the one you have been forced into. But I know I cannot make those things happen for you. Only you can make those choices." "I do not know how to make those choices. I do not even know if I am strong enough to try." "You are stronger than you think. I see it in the way you survive each day, the way you keep going despite everything. That takes a kind of strength most people never have to develop." His hands dropped from her face, but his eyes held hers. "I am not asking you to make any decisions right now. I am just asking you to remember that you have worth, that you deserve better, and that if you ever decide you want something different, I will help you in any way I can." Grace's throat was too tight to speak. She nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the house, her legs shaking beneath her. Behind her, she heard Austin gathering up the guns and cans, giving her space to process everything that had just happened. That night, Grace could barely look at Jacob across the supper table. Guilt gnawed at her, though she had done nothing wrong by any objective measure. She had not been unfaithful, had not betrayed her marriage vows in action. But in her heart, in the secret places she barely admitted to herself. She knew she had already betrayed Jacob by allowing herself to care about what Austin thought of her, by treasuring his gentle words like precious gems. "You are quiet tonight," Jacob observed, and there was suspicion in his tone. "Just tired, sir. It has been a long day." Grace kept her eyes on her plate. "Trent said you were learning to shoot this afternoon." Grace's heart skipped. Had Austin told Jacob about their conversation? No, he would not do that, would he? "Yes, sir. He thought it would be wise for me to know how to protect myself while you are gone on the drive." I suppose that is sensible enough." Jacob pushed back from the table, apparently satisfied. "Though I do not like the idea of you being alone with him." "Pete and Sam were nearby the whole time," Grace lied smoothly. "They were working on the fence by the south pasture." It was a calculated risk, but Jacob would have no reason to ask the other hands about it, and even if he did, they would have no reason to contradict her story. Jacob grunted and retreated to his office, and Grace released the breath she had been holding. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and tension. Austin continued to teach Grace shooting in stolen afternoon hours, always with a convenient cover story about where the other hands were or what chores she was supposedly completing. She improved steadily, her aim becoming more confident, her comfort with the weapon growing. But more than the shooting lessons, it was the conversations that marked Grace's days with color and light. Austin told her stories about his life on the trail, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. He talked about his childhood, about losing his mother and eventually running away from his father at 15. He had worked his way across Texas and beyond, learning the cowboy trade from men who cared more about skill than pedigree. In turn, Grace found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. About her father's farm and how much she had loved working the garden, getting her hands dirty in the soil and watching things grow. About her dreams of one day having children, though the prospect of bringing a child into her current situation terrified her. About the small rebellions that kept her sane, like sometimes deliberately making Jacob's coffee a little too weak, or forgetting to starch his shirts quite as stiff as he preferred. "You have more fight in you than you give yourself credit for," Austin said one afternoon, his eyes warm with approval. "Those little rebellions might seem small, but they are you asserting that you are still a person, not just a possession. Do not discount that." Grace laughed, surprised by the sound of her own genuine amusement. "I never thought of it that way. I just thought I was being petty." Survival is not petty. Maintaining your sense of self in a situation designed to crush it is not petty. It is remarkable. Austin handed her the pistol for another round of practice. "You are remarkable, Grace." The compliment settled into Grace's chest like a warm coal, glowing with a heat that spread through her entire body. She was remarkable. When was the last time she had felt remarkable? When was the last time she had felt anything other than scared or numb? As the days counted down toward the cattle drive, Grace found herself caught between relief and dread. Relief because Jacob would be gone for 2 weeks, leaving her alone in the house with a freedom she had not known since marriage. Dread because Austin would be gone too, and she was beginning to realize how much his presence had come to mean to her. It was dangerous, this growing attachment. It was foolish and risky and completely inappropriate. But Grace could not seem to stop her heart from turning toward Austin like a flower toward the sun, seeking the warmth and light he offered so freely. The night before the drive was scheduled to begin, Jacob hosted a small gathering of the men in the barn to go over final details. Grace prepared food and brought it out, then retreated to the house as was expected. But from the kitchen window, she could see the barn illuminated with lamplight, could hear the low rumble of male voices discussing routes and logistics. She was washing dishes when a knock came at the back door. Startled, Grace dried her hands and opened it to find Austin standing in the shadows, his hat in his hands. "I am sorry to bother you," he said quietly. "I know I should not be here, but I needed to speak with you before we leave tomorrow." Grace glanced nervously toward the barn. "Jacob will notice if you are gone too long. I told them I needed to check on my horse. I have a few minutes." Austin's expression was serious, almost grave. "Can I come in?" Every instinct screamed at Grace to refuse, but she stepped back and let him enter. Austin moved into the kitchen, seeming to fill the small space with his presence. They stood awkwardly for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. "I will be gone for 2 weeks," Austin finally said, "and I need to know that you will be all right here alone." "I will be fine." Better than fine, actually. 2 weeks without Jacob will be like a holiday. Grace tried to make her voice light, but it came out strained. "Grace." Austin's voice was serious. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me say it all the way through. Can you do that?" She nodded, her heart hammering. "Over the past 3 weeks, I've come to care about you more than I have any right to. You are married, and I am just a drifter who will move on eventually. I know that, but knowing it does not change how I feel." Austin's hands tightened on his hat brim. "You are one of the bravest, strongest, most beautiful women I have ever met, and it kills me to see you trapped in a situation that diminishes you, that makes you afraid to be yourself." "Austin, please." Grace's voice broke. "Let me finish, please." He took a step closer. "When I come back from this drive, I am going to ask you to leave with me. I am going to offer you a way out of this life, a chance at something different. I know I cannot offer you much. I do not have land or money or a fancy house, but I can offer you safety. I can promise never to raise my hand to you, never to make you feel small or scared. I can promise to cherish you the way a man should cherish a woman." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "You do not know what you are asking. Jacob would never let me go. He would hunt us down. And even if he did not, people would talk. A woman who leaves her husband is ruined, Austin, completely ruined. Only if you care what people think, and I have never cared much about that." Austin set his hat on the table and reached out, cupping her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "I am not asking you to decide tonight. I am just asking you to think about it while I am gone. Think about what you want, not what you should want or what people expect you to want. Just what you, Grace, in your heart, truly want." "I want to be free," she whispered. "I want to wake up without fear. I want to laugh without calculating whether it is safe. I want to be touched with kindness instead of cruelty. I want all of that so badly it physically hurts, but wanting and having are different things. They do not have to be." Austin's thumbs brushed away her tears. "I know you are scared. You would be crazy not to be, but fear should not be the only thing that determines the rest of your life. Sometimes you have to be scared and brave at the same time." From the barn came the sound of men's laughter, a reminder that this stolen moment would have to end soon. Austin seemed to realize it too. He dropped his hands from her face but caught one of her hands in his, raised it to his lips, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt like a promise and a prayer combined. "Think about it," he said softly. 2 weeks. When I come back, I will be ready to leave if you want to come with me. But the choice has to be yours, Grace. I will not force you or pressure you. Whatever you decide, I will respect it." Then he was gone, slipping out the back door and into the night before Grace could form a response. She stood in the kitchen, her hand still tingling from his kiss, her heart racing and her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. That night, Grace barely slept. She lay beside Jacob and thought about everything Austin had said. The offer was insane, reckless, completely impractical. Running away with a cowboy she had known for 3 weeks would be social suicide. Even if they went somewhere far away, started fresh, the scandal would follow them. She would be branded an adulteress, a faithless wife. Churches would refuse her. Decent society would shun her. But what was decent society worth if it demanded she stay in a marriage that was slowly killing her? What did propriety matter if the cost was her very soul? Grace had no answers, only questions that chased themselves in endless circles through her exhausted mind. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching Grace's mood. She prepared an early breakfast for the men who would be leaving with the cattle. Jacob was in high spirits, excited about the drive and the money the herd would bring. He spoke to Grace with something approaching kindness, which was how he always acted before leaving on a trip, as if he could erase weeks of cruelty with a few hours of basic decency. "You will be all right here alone?" he asked as she packed food for the journey. "Yes, of course." Grace kept her voice steady. "I have plenty to keep me occupied. I left money in the desk for supplies if you need them. Do not go into town alone. Send word to the Miller place if you need something and have them send one of their boys." Jacob's instructions were practical, treating her like a child who could not be trusted with basic decisions. "I will be back in 2 weeks, maybe a bit longer depending on prices in Fort Worth." "I understand." Grace handed him the packed saddlebag, careful not to meet his eyes. Outside, the men were assembling, the cattle already being moved into position. Grace watched from the porch as Austin checked his mare's saddle, his movements efficient and practiced. He glanced up once, his eyes finding hers across the yard, and in that brief look was a wealth of emotion that made Grace's breath catch. Then Jacob was mounting up, calling out orders, and the drive was beginning. Grace stood on the porch and watched them disappear into the gray morning. 200 head of cattle kicking up dust as they moved, the 4 men riding alongside to keep them in line. She watched until they were completely out of sight, until even the dust had settled, and then she was alone. The silence was immediate and profound. Grace walked back into the house and stood in the middle of the kitchen, listening to the absence of sound. No Jacob calling for coffee or demanding to know why some chore had not been completed to his satisfaction. No heavy footsteps that made her tense in anticipation of what mood he might be in. Just silence and stillness, and the heady, terrifying sensation of being completely alone. For the first hour, Grace could not relax. She kept expecting Jacob to come back, to have forgotten something or changed his mind. She jumped at every sound, every creak of the house settling or whisper of wind through the eaves. But gradually, as the morning stretched toward noon and no one appeared, Grace began to believe she really was alone. She made herself lunch and ate it sitting at the kitchen table instead of standing by the stove. Such a small act of rebellion, but it felt monumental. She took her time, actually tasting the food instead of eating mechanically. When she finished, she washed her single plate and cup, then walked through the house slowly, really looking at her surroundings for the first time in years. This was her home, or it was supposed to be. But Grace realized she felt no attachment to it whatsoever. It was just a building, 4 walls and a roof, a cage dressed up to look like a house. There was nothing here that was truly hers, nothing that reflected who she was or what she cared about. Even the few personal items she had brought from her mother's house had been gradually removed or destroyed by Jacob, who did not like clutter or sentiment. Grace climbed the stairs to the bedroom she shared with Jacob and opened the wardrobe where her few dresses hung. Plain, practical garments in dark colors that Jacob deemed appropriate for a ranch wife. Grace pulled out the single dress that held any color, a deep green one her mother had made for her 18th birthday. Jacob hated it, said it was too bright, too showy. Grace had not worn it since the first month of their marriage when his disapproval had turned to anger. Now she took off her dark blue dress and slipped into the green one. It was a bit loose, evidence of the weight she had lost, but it still fit. Grace looked at herself in the small mirror above the dresser and barely recognized the woman looking back. When had she last worn anything that was not chosen to make her invisible? She wore the green dress for the rest of the day, a small act of defiance that felt like a revolution. That night, Grace made herself a proper supper and ate it at the table by lamplight, pretending she was dining in a fine restaurant instead of alone in a ranch house in the middle of nowhere. She read from one of Jacob's books, something she was forbidden to do because he said reading filled women's heads with foolish ideas. And as she read, Grace let herself think about Austin's offer. Really think about it, examining it from every angle without the fear of Jacob walking in and reading guilt on her face. What would it mean to leave with Austin? To ride away from this life and try to build something new? The practical obstacles were enormous. She would need clothes, money, supplies. She would need to figure out where they could go where Jacob would not find them. Texas was a big state, but it was not that big, and Jacob had business connections throughout the region. But beyond the practical concerns were deeper questions about what Grace wanted for herself. Did she want to be with Austin, or did she just want to escape Jacob? Was she drawn to Austin himself, or just to the idea of rescue? And what kind of life could they build together? Two people who barely knew each other, bound together by circumstance rather than time and genuine knowledge. Grace spent the first week of her solitude wrestling with these questions. She fell into a routine that felt both strange and wonderful. She woke when she wanted, ate what and when she pleased, worked on projects she chose rather than ones assigned to her. She practiced shooting every afternoon, becoming more and more comfortable with the pistol Austin had left for her. And in the evenings, she sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, allowing herself to simply exist without purpose or fear. By the middle of the second week, Grace had made her decision. She knew it was crazy and reckless and would likely end in disaster. But she also knew she could not go back to the way things were. Whether her future was with Austin or not, it could not be with Jacob. She had tasted freedom, however brief, and the thought of returning to her cage was unbearable. Grace began to prepare in small ways. She gathered her few possessions worth taking: the green dress, a photograph of her mother, a locket that had belonged to her grandmother. She found Jacob's cash box in his office and, after a moment of hesitation, took half of what was inside. It was probably not enough to be worth the theft in legal terms, but it would help. She packed everything into a small bag and hid it under her bed. Then she waited. The men returned on a Thursday afternoon, the sound of their approach audible long before Grace could see them. Her heart raced as she smoothed her dress, the green one because she had worn it every day and refused to change back for Jacob's return, and went out to meet them. Jacob was in excellent spirits, the drive having gone well, and the cattle having brought a good price. He dismounted and actually smiled at Grace, a rare expression that looked foreign on his usually stern face. "We made $800 profit," he announced. "More than I expected." "That is wonderful news, sir." Grace forced her voice to remain level. Austin dismounted more slowly, his eyes finding Grace's immediately. The question was there, unspoken but clear. "Have you thought about it? Have you decided?" Grace gave the tiniest nod, so small she was not sure Austin even saw it. But something shifted in his expression, a flash of hope mixed with determination. "Grace, get these men fed," Jacob ordered, already turning toward the house. I need to record the finances while the numbers are fresh in my mind. The next few hours were torturous. Grace prepared food while listening to Jacob work in his office, the scratch of his pen on paper marking numbers that represented cattle sold and money earned. Austin and the other hands cleaned up from the trail, their voices drifting from the barn. Grace wanted desperately to speak with Austin alone, to confirm that her small nod had conveyed what she meant it to, but there was no opportunity. Supper was a loud affair with all the men gathered around the table, Jacob holding court and describing the successful drive. Grace served and cleared, invisible as always, while her mind raced ahead to what would come next. How would she and Austin arrange to leave? When? Where would they go? After the meal, Pete and Sam rode back into town, their work completed. Austin remained, ostensibly to help with some final cleanup and equipment repair that Jacob wanted done before he moved on to his next job. Jacob retreated to his office again, leaving Grace to clean the kitchen while Austin worked in the barn. Grace finished the dishes and stepped out onto the porch, seeking fresh air and a moment to calm her racing thoughts. The sun had set, leaving the sky awash in deep purple. She heard footsteps and turned to find Austin approaching from the barn, his expression cautious. "Evening, madam," he said formally, aware that Jacob might be listening. "I wanted to let you know I finished oiling the saddles as requested." "Thank you, Austin." Grace kept her own voice neutral. "Would you like some coffee before you retire for the night?" It was an innocuous offer, one that could not be construed as improper. Austin nodded and followed her into the kitchen. Grace poured coffee with shaking hands, then set the cup on the table. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the distance between them feeling like miles. "Tomorrow," Austin said quietly. "Before dawn, can you be ready?" Grace's heart hammered. "Yes, I have a bag packed, but Jacob will notice my horse is gone." "Leave the horse, I will take you on mine." "We will ride hard and fast, put as much distance between us and here as possible before he realizes you are gone." Austin's voice was calm, but Grace could see the tension in his shoulders. "I have been thinking about this for 2 weeks. There is a town called Fredericksburg, about 100 miles northwest of here. It was settled by Germans and they mind their own business. We can start there, then move on if we need to. He will come after us. You know that, right? Jacob will not just let me go." "I know. But Texas is a big state and we will have a head start." Austin's eyes held hers. "Grace, if you have changed your mind, tell me now. I will not hold it against you, but if we do this, we have to commit. There is no going back." "I know." Grace's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I am ready. I choose this. I choose you." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration and a promise. Austin's expression softened, and for a moment Grace thought he might cross the room and take her in his arms. But he stayed where he was, respecting the fragile propriety of the moment. "Before dawn, then. I will be waiting by the cottonwoods at the creek. Bring only what you can carry easily." He set down his coffee cup, barely touched. "Thank you for the coffee, madam. I will see you in the morning." He left before Grace could respond, his footsteps fading toward the barn. Grace stood in the kitchen, her hands pressed against the table to keep them from shaking. Tomorrow her entire life would change for better or worse. That night Grace barely slept. She lay beside Jacob and counted the hours, her packed bag hidden under the bed feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every sound made her tense, convinced that somehow Jacob knew her plans and was about to confront her. But he slept soundly, snoring softly, completely unaware that his wife was planning to leave him in a few short hours. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, Grace slipped from the bed. She dressed quickly in her darkest dress for traveling, then retrieved her bag from under the bed. Moving with the silence of long practice, she crept down the stairs and through the house. At the back door, she paused for one last look at the place that had been her prison for 3 years. Goodbye, she thought. Goodbye and good riddance. The walk to the cottonwoods felt like the longest of Grace's life. Every shadow seemed to hide Jacob, ready to drag her back. Every sound made her jump. But she reached the creek without incident and found Austin waiting exactly where he said he would be, his mare saddled and ready. "You came," he said softly, and there was relief in his voice. "I said I would." Grace handed him her bag, which he secured to the saddle. No second thoughts. "Dozens, but I am here anyway." Grace looked up at him in the pre-dawn darkness. "Are you sure about this, Austin?" "Once we leave, there is no going back. Jacob will likely make trouble for you if he finds us. Let him try." Austin mounted the horse, then reached down to help Grace up behind him. "Hold on tight. We have a long ride ahead." Grace wrapped her arms around Austin's waist and pressed her face against his back, breathing in the scent of leather and horses and freedom. Austin spurred the mare into motion, and they rode away from the ranch as the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern horizon. They rode hard for the first few hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ranch. Austin chose a route that avoided the main roads, following deer trails and creek beds that would be harder to track. Around mid-morning, they stopped briefly to rest the horse and eat some of the food Austin had packed. "How are you holding up?" he asked, helping Grace dismount. Her legs were shaky from the long ride and her muscles ached from the unfamiliar position, but Grace had never felt more alive. "I am fine. How far have we come?" "Maybe 15 miles. Not as far as I would like, but the mare needs rest." Austin offered her water from his canteen. "We will rest for an hour, then ride again. If we keep a good pace, we can make Fredericksburg in about 3 days." 3 days of riding, 3 days of looking over their shoulders, 3 days of running. But Grace was not afraid. Standing in the morning sunlight with Austin beside her and miles of open country ahead, she felt something she had not felt in years: hope. They fell into a routine over the next 3 days. Ride, rest, ride again. At night they made cold camps, not risking a fire that might draw attention. Austin was careful to maintain propriety, sleeping several feet away from Grace and treating her with unfailing respect, despite the intimacy forced by their circumstances. They talked during the rest periods, sharing stories and dreams, learning about each other in ways that felt both rushed and completely natural. Grace told Austin about her childhood, about the garden she had loved and the mother who had tried her best despite poverty and hardship. Austin talked about his years on the trail, about the beauty and brutality of the cowboy life, about his dream of one day having a small ranch of his own where he could raise horses. "I am not asking you to live on dreams," he said on the second night as they sat under a canopy of stars. "I know I cannot offer you much right now, but I will work hard, save money, build something real. I promise you that." "I do not need much," Grace replied honestly. "After living with Jacob, my standards are fairly low. A roof that does not leak and a man who does not hit me would be luxury." Austin's jaw tightened at the reminder of what Grace had endured. "You deserve so much more than that, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." They reached Fredericksburg on the afternoon of the 4th day, both exhausted and saddle-sore but triumphant. The town was exactly as Austin had described: clean, orderly, with a distinctly German character in its architecture and culture. They found a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Hoffman, who asked no awkward questions when Austin introduced Grace as his wife. "We have just married and are looking to settle in the area," Austin explained, the lie coming smoothly. "Do you know of any work available? I am good with horses and cattle, willing to do most anything honest. Mrs. Hoffman considered them with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see more than Austin probably wanted her to, but she simply nodded. My nephew has a ranch outside town. He is always looking for good workers. I will send word if you like. That would be much appreciated, madam. The room Mrs. Hoffman showed them was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over a small garden. Grace stood in the center of it and felt tears prick her eyes. A room of her own, or at least a room she shared by choice rather than obligation. It is perfect, she whispered. Austin set down their bags and turned to face her. The late afternoon light slanting through the window turned his hair to gold and cast his features in sharp relief. Grace, about the sleeping arrangements. I will bed down on the floor. I know Mrs. Hoffman thinks we are married, but you and I both know we are not. I will not presume. The offer was so perfectly, quintessentially Austin that Grace felt her heart expand in her chest. Here was a man who had just ridden 4 days to rescue her from an abusive marriage, who had risked everything to give her a chance at freedom, and he was still concerned about propriety and her comfort. Austin. Grace crossed the small space between them and laid her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. I know we are not married. Not legally, not yet. But I also know that I want to be, not because I need rescuing or because I have nowhere else to go, but because in these few weeks I have known you, you have shown me more kindness and respect than Jacob did in 3 years. You have made me feel seen and valued and worth something. I do not know if that is love, but it is something good and real, and I want to build on it. Austin covered her hand with his own, his eyes searching her face. You have been through so much. I do not want you to feel obligated or rushed into anything because of circumstances. I do not feel obligated. I feel grateful and hopeful and terrified and excited all at once. Grace smiled, the expression feeling foreign but wonderful on her face. I am choosing this, Austin. I am choosing you, not because I have to, but because I want to. Grace. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Are you sure? Instead of answering with words, Grace rose on her toes and kissed him. It was a tentative kiss, uncertain and exploratory. The kiss of a woman who had known only brutality learning what tenderness felt like. Austin froze for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her with exquisite gentleness, as if she were something precious and fragile that might shatter at too rough a touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. I will get a minister. Tomorrow. We will do this right and proper. Tomorrow, Grace agreed. But tonight, can you just hold me? I do not want anything more than that. I just want to fall asleep knowing I am safe. I can do that. Austin led her to the bed and they lay down together fully clothed. Grace curled against his side, her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in years she fell asleep without fear. True to his word, Austin arranged for a minister the next day. The ceremony was simple and brief, held in the small German Lutheran church with Mrs. Hoffman and her nephew Klaus as witnesses. Grace wore her green dress and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers Austin had picked that morning. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Austin kissed her with a tenderness that made Grace's eyes fill with tears. I will cherish you, he promised against her lips, every day for the rest of my life. Klaus Hoffman offered Austin work on his ranch, and they settled into a rhythm of life that felt both strange and wonderful to Grace. Austin worked long days breaking horses and mending fences, while Grace helped Mrs. Hoffman with the boarding house in exchange for reduced rent. It was hard work, but it was work Grace chose rather than work demanded of her, and that made all the difference. The weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, Grace felt herself healing in ways she had not known were possible. The fear that had been her constant companion began to fade, replaced by a tentative but growing sense of security. Austin proved himself over and over to be a man of his word, gentle and patient and kind, even when he was tired or frustrated. They had been in Fredericksburg for 3 months when a stranger rode into town asking questions about a missing woman. Grace was at the general store when she overheard 2 men discussing it. "Fellow from Camp Verde looking for his wife," one said. "Says she ran off with one of his hired hands, offering a reward for information." Grace's blood turned to ice. Jacob had found them. Or at least, he had found Fredericksburg. She hurried back to the boarding house and found Austin in their room preparing to head out to the Hoffman Ranch. "Jacob is here," she said without preamble. "Or at least, he is looking for me here. Someone in town is talking about a man from Camp Verde looking for his missing wife." Austin's expression hardened. "Pack a bag. We will leave tonight." "No." The word surprised Grace as much as it seemed to surprise Austin. "No more running. I am tired of running, tired of being afraid. If Jacob wants to find me, let him find me. I will tell him to his face that I am not going back." "Grace, that is dangerous. You know how he is." "I do know, but I also know that I cannot spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." Grace crossed to Austin and took his hands in hers. "I have you now. I have a life here, friends, work, a home. I'm not giving that up because Jacob thinks he still owns me." Austin searched her face, clearly torn between admiration and concern. "If we stay and face him, it could get ugly. He might try to force you back, might claim I kidnapped you or some such nonsense. Then we will deal with it, together." Grace squeezed his hands. "I am not the same terrified woman I was 3 months ago, Austin. You have helped me find my strength again. Let me use it." The confrontation came 2 days later. Grace was sweeping the front porch of the boarding house when she looked up to see Jacob riding down the main street. Her heart seized, but she did not run. She stood tall, the broom handle gripped in her hands, and waited. Jacob saw her and dismounted, his face a mask of fury barely contained. "Grace, there you are. I have been looking everywhere for you. I know. I heard you were in town." Grace's voice was steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Get your things. We are leaving. Now." Jacob spoke as if the past 3 months had not happened, as if his authority over her was absolute and unquestionable. "No." The word hung in the air between them. Jacob's face darkened. "What did you say?" "I said no. I am not going back with you, Jacob. I am not your wife anymore." Grace lifted her chin. "I have married Austin Trent. I have a new life here. You need to leave." "You are still my wife in the eyes of God and the law," Jacob snarled, taking a step toward her. "Whatever sham ceremony you went through with that cowboy does not count for anything. You are coming home with me, and when we get there, you are going to learn what happens to wives who forget their place." The lady said no. Austin's voice came from behind Grace. She had not heard him approach, but she felt the solid warmth of his presence at her back. "I suggest you respect that and ride on out of here." Jacob's eyes narrowed as he focused on Austin. You stole my wife and my property. I should have you arrested. Grace is not property, and she left of her own free will." Austin moved to stand beside Grace, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back in a gesture of support. "She is my wife now, legally married in the church here in Fredericksburg. You have no claim on her. I have every claim. She was married to me first, and you are nothing but a horse thief and a kidnapper." Jacob's voice rose, drawing attention from passers-by on the street. "I am neither. I am a man who helped a woman escape an abusive situation. If you want to press charges, go ahead. But I think you will find that the law takes a dim view of men who beat their wives." Austin's voice was calm but firm. And if you try to take Grace by force, you will answer to me." Jacob's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and everything seemed to slow down. Grace saw the movement, saw the intent in Jacob's eyes, and acted without thinking. She still carried the small pistol Austin had taught her to shoot, tucked into her pocket for protection. She drew it now and aimed it squarely at Jacob's chest. "Do not." Her voice was ice. "I know how to use this, and I will if you force me to. Touch that gun and I will shoot you where you stand." Jacob froze, his eyes widening in shock. He had never seen Grace defend herself, had never imagined she was capable of such a thing. "You would not dare. Try me." Grace's hands were steady, her aim true. 3 months of practice and a lifetime of fear had prepared her for this moment. "I have nothing to lose, Jacob. You already took everything from me that mattered. All I have now is my freedom, and I will kill to protect it." For a long moment they stood frozen in tableau. Grace with her gun drawn, Jacob with his hand on his weapon, Austin ready to intervene if needed. The street had gone silent, everyone watching to see what would happen next. Then Klaus Hoffman stepped out of the general store, his own rifle cradled in his arms. "I think you should listen to the lady, mister. We do not take kindly to men who threaten our citizens here in Fredericksburg." The town sheriff appeared from his office across the street. "Problem here." "This man is harassing my wife," Austin said calmly, "threatening to take her by force despite her clear refusal to go with him." The sheriff looked between Jacob and Grace, taking in the gun still trained on Jacob's chest and the fury on Jacob's face. "That true, mister. She is my wife." "She has no right to refuse." Jacob's voice was desperate now, his control slipping. "Actually, she does." The sheriff's voice was mild, but his hand rested on his own pistol. "This is Texas, and we believe in a person's right to determine their own fate. The lady says she does not want to go with you. That is good enough for me. Now you can ride out peaceful, or I can arrest you for disturbing the peace. Your choice." Grace saw the moment Jacob realized he had lost. His shoulders sagged and his hand fell away from his gun. But the look he turned on Grace was pure venom. "You will regret this, both of you. I will make sure of it." "Maybe so," Grace replied, her gun still steady. "But at least I will have lived free, even if only for a little while. That is more than I ever had with you." Jacob mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. "This is not over." "Yes, it is." Austin's voice was final. "Do not come back here, Zimmerman. You are not welcome." They watched Jacob ride out of town, his back stiff with rage and humiliation. Only when he was completely out of sight did Grace lower her gun, her hands finally beginning to shake with reaction. "You did it," Austin said softly, pulling her into his arms. "You stood up to him." Grace buried her face in Austin's chest, her body trembling. "I was so scared." "I know." "But you did not let the fear control you. You faced him down." Austin pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I am so proud of you." Mrs. Hoffman appeared on the porch, her expression approving. "Come inside, child. I will make you some tea. You have earned it." That night, lying in bed with Austin's arms around her, Grace finally allowed herself to believe that she was truly free. Jacob might cause trouble, might even come back, but she knew now that she was strong enough to face him. She was not the broken, terrified woman who had cowered in a barn in Camp Verde. She was Grace Trent, a woman who had fought for her freedom and won. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. It was the first time she had said the words, and they felt like opening a door she had kept locked for years. Austin's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. Have loved you since the first time I saw you trying to pretend that bruise was from a fall. I think I knew even then that you were going to change my life. I hope I changed it for the better. You changed it for everything that matters." Austin shifted so he could look down at her in the moonlight streaming through the window. Grace, I know things have happened fast between us. I know we have not had the luxury of a proper courtship or time to build slowly, but I want you to know that I am committed to this, to us, for as long as you will have me. Forever then. Grace reached up to cup his face. I want forever. Austin kissed her, and this time there was passion behind the tenderness, a promise of the life they would build together. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Grace felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was what marriage was supposed to be: partnership and respect and desire freely given and received. They made love for the first time that night, and it was a revelation to Grace. Where Jacob had been rough and selfish, taking what he wanted without regard for her needs or comfort, Austin was gentle and attentive, making sure she was ready, checking that she was all right. It was overwhelming and beautiful and healing all at once, washing away the trauma of her first marriage and replacing it with something precious and new. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the sheets, Grace wept. But these were tears of release, of joy, of finally understanding what it meant to be cherished. "Did I hurt you?" Austin asked, concern lacing his voice. "No, no, you were perfect. It is just all so different from what I knew before." Grace wiped at her tears. "With Jacob, it was always about his needs, his desires. He never cared whether I enjoyed it or not, but you made it beautiful." Austin pulled her closer, his lips against her hair. "It should always be beautiful. It should always be about both people, about connection and pleasure shared." "I am sorry Jacob taught you anything different." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Grace's dreams were peaceful for the first time in years. The months that followed were the happiest of Grace's life. She and Austin built a life together in Fredericksburg, simple but satisfying. Austin's skill with horses earned him a reputation, and Klaus Hoffman eventually offered to make him a partner in the ranch. With the increased income, they were able to rent a small house of their own, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Grace planted a garden, fulfilling a dream she had held since childhood. She grew vegetables and flowers, getting her hands dirty in the soil and finding a peace in the work that she had forgotten existed. Austin came home each evening to find her there, and they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset together, talking about their days and their dreams. A year after they had fled Camp Verde, Grace discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She wanted children desperately, had always imagined herself as a mother. But the thought of bringing a child into the world, of being responsible for another life, was overwhelming. "What if I am not a good mother?" She confessed to Austin one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You will be an amazing mother." Austin's voice was full of conviction. "You have so much love to give, Grace. Any child of ours will be blessed to have you. But what if something goes wrong? What if Jacob comes back and tries to take the baby? What if—" Austin silenced her with a gentle kiss. "We cannot live our lives based on what ifs. Yes, things could go wrong, but they could also go beautifully right. We will face whatever comes together, just like we always have." Their son was born on a warm spring morning, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to everyone within earshot. Austin was there for the birth, holding Grace's hand through the pain and crying openly when the midwife placed the baby in his arms. "He is perfect," Austin breathed, staring down at the tiny face with an expression of complete awe. "Grace, look what we made." They named him Thomas after Austin's grandfather, and he became the center of their world. Grace discovered that motherhood suited her, that the protective fierceness she had developed in defending herself from Jacob translated into a deep and abiding love for her son. She would do anything, endure anything, to keep Thomas safe and happy. Austin was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son. He would come home covered in dust from the ranch and immediately scoop up Thomas, talking to him about horses and cattle and the wide Texas sky. Grace would watch them together and feel her heart swell with a happiness so profound, it sometimes frightened her. 2 years after Thomas was born, their daughter arrived. She had Grace's green eyes and Austin's dark hair, and they named her Margaret after Grace's mother. Where Thomas was boisterous and energetic, Margaret was thoughtful and quiet, but both children were raised with an abundance of love and security. Grace occasionally thought about Jacob, wondered what had become of him. She heard through the occasional traveler that he had sold the ranch in Camp Verde and moved elsewhere, possibly to New Mexico territory. The news brought her relief. As long as he stayed away, as long as he did not try to interfere with the life she had built, she could live with the knowledge that he was out there somewhere. On Thomas's 5th birthday, Grace and Austin took the children on a picnic to a meadow outside town. They spread a blanket under a massive oak tree and watched as the children ran through the wildflowers, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked Austin as they sat side by side, his arm around her shoulders. "Giving up the cowboy life, settling down here instead of moving from job to job the way you used to?" Austin considered the question seriously. "There are things I miss about the trail, the freedom, the adventure, sleeping under the stars, but I would not trade what I have now for anything. This life, this family, this is what I was searching for all those years without even knowing it. I am glad you found it, found me." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved my life, Austin, not just from Jacob, but from losing myself completely. You showed me that I was worth saving. You saved yourself, Grace. I just walked beside you while you did it." Austin pressed a kiss to her temple. "And you saved me too, gave me a reason to stop drifting and put down roots, taught me what it means to truly love someone." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play. Thomas had found a frog and was showing it to Margaret, who squealed with delight. The sound of their joy was the sweetest music Grace had ever heard. "I want more," Grace said suddenly. Austin looked at her in surprise. "More children, more everything. More years like this. More sunsets and picnics and ordinary days that feel extraordinary because I am living them with you." Grace turned to face him fully. "I want to grow old with you, Austin Trent. I want to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. I want a lifetime of this. Then that is exactly what we will have." Austin cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I promise you a lifetime of love and laughter and as much happiness as I can possibly give you. Until my last breath, I am yours." He kissed her then, sweet and slow and full of promise. Their children, seeing their parents kissing, ran over and piled onto them in a giggling heap of arms and legs and unconditional love. Grace laughed, the sound bubbling up from deep inside her, pure and joyful and free. This was her life now. Not perfect, not without challenges or hard days. But it was hers, chosen and fought for and cherished. She was Grace Trent, wife of a good man, mother of 2 beautiful children, and most importantly, she was free. The fear that had once defined her existence had faded to a distant memory, replaced by trust and love and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Austin had earned her trust one gentle word at a time, had shown her through patience and kindness that not all men were like Jacob, that marriage could be a partnership rather than a prison. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Grace held her family close and gave thanks for the cowboy who had wandered into her life and changed everything. She had been too scared to trust, had nearly let fear rob her of the future she deserved. But Austin had been patient, had waited while she found her courage, and together they had built something beautiful from the ashes of her broken past. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the life Grace and Austin built together. Thomas grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's quiet determination. Margaret developed a love of books and learning, spending hours reading anything she could get her hands on. They added another son, Daniel, when Margaret was 3, and then finally a daughter they named Caroline when Grace was 31. The house they had rented eventually became too small, so Austin and Klaus Hoffman went into full partnership on the ranch, and they built a larger home on the property. It was nothing fancy, but it had 4 bedrooms and a wide front porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Grace's garden expanded to include fruit trees and berry bushes, and she became known throughout Fredericksburg for her preserves and pies. Austin never raised a hand to her in anger, never spoke to her with cruelty or contempt. There were disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or tension as any marriage experiences. But they learned to talk through their problems, to listen to each other's perspectives, to compromise and forgive. Austin kept his promise to cherish Grace, and she in turn gave him the fierce, protective love of a woman who knew the value of what they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Austin surprised Grace with a gift. He led her out to the barn where a beautiful mare stood in one of the stalls, her coat a rich mahogany. "She is yours," Austin said, smiling at Grace's expression of shock. "I know you never really learned to ride properly, always being too busy or too tired. But I thought maybe now, with the children getting older, you might like to learn. We could ride together sometimes, just the 2 of us." Grace approached the mare cautiously, reaching out to stroke her soft nose. "She is beautiful, but Austin, this is too much. Nothing is too much for you. Besides, Klaus gave me a good price on her. She is gentle, perfect for a beginner." Austin came to stand beside Grace, his hand finding hers. "I want to share that part of my life with you, show you the country the way I see it from horseback. If you want to, that is. I want to." Grace turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "Thank you, for this, for everything, for the life you have given me." "We gave each other this life," Austin corrected. "I am just as grateful to you as you are to me." Grace did learn to ride, and they spent many evenings exploring the countryside together, the children left in Mrs. Hoffman's capable care. Those rides became some of Grace's most treasured memories, moments stolen from the demands of daily life where she and Austin could talk freely, laugh together, simply enjoy each other's company. When Thomas turned 18 and announced his intention to join his father in the horse-raising business, Grace felt the bittersweet pang of seeing her firstborn become a man. But she was proud of the person he had become, honest and hardworking and kind. Margaret, at 16, was already talking about becoming a teacher, inspired by the education she had received at the small school in Fredericksburg. Grace was 40 when she received word that Jacob had died. A lawyer from New Mexico Territory wrote to inform her that her first husband had passed away from pneumonia, and that as his only legal heir, she was entitled to his remaining property. The amount was not large, Jacob having gambled and drunk away most of his money in the years since Grace had left him. Grace stood on her porch holding the letter, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that Jacob could no longer threaten her or her family. Sadness for the waste of a life consumed by anger and cruelty. But mostly, she felt nothing. Jacob was part of her past, a chapter that had closed long ago. His death changed nothing about her present life or her future. "You all right?" Austin asked, coming to stand beside her. Grace handed him the letter. "Jacob is dead. We are truly free now, I suppose. Not that we were not before, but now there is no possibility of him ever coming back." Austin read the letter, then folded it carefully and set it aside. "How do you feel about it?" "Honestly, relieved. And a little sad that he never found whatever it was he was looking for that might have made him happy." Grace leaned against Austin's solid warmth. "But mostly, I just feel grateful. Grateful that I got out when I did, that I found you, that I have had all these years of happiness to replace those terrible ones." "You never have to think about him again if you do not want to," Austin said softly. "I know, and I do not plan to." Grace turned in his arms and smiled up at him. "I would rather think about the future, about watching our children build their own lives, about growing old with you. Those are much more pleasant thoughts." They stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over the ranch they had built together, and Grace felt a profound sense of peace. The scared young woman who had hidden in a barn in Camp Verde was long gone, transformed by love and courage into someone strong and certain and free. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of ordinary joys and small triumphs. Thomas married a local girl named Sarah and gave Grace and Austin their first grandchild, a boy they named Austin in honor of his grandfather. Margaret did indeed become a teacher, bringing education to children in the surrounding ranches and farms. Daniel followed his father and brother into the horse business, showing a particular talent for training difficult animals. And Caroline, the youngest, developed a passion for medicine, unusual for a woman but encouraged by her progressive parents. Grace and Austin grew older together, their hair graying and their bodies slowing, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren, the house full of laughter and life. "Can you believe it has been 25 years?" Grace asked Austin as they sat together on the porch that evening, the party winding down inside. "Some days it feels like yesterday that I rode into Camp Verde and saw you for the first time," Austin replied, his hand finding hers in the familiar, comfortable gesture of long marriage. "Other days it feels like we have been together forever, like I cannot remember a time when you were not part of my life. I was so scared back then, of everything, of Jacob, of you, of my own feelings. I could not imagine trusting anyone ever again." Grace squeezed his hand. "But you were patient. You did not demand my trust, you earned it, one gentle word at a time like you said you would. You were worth the wait, worth everything." Austin brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every mile we rode, every challenge we faced, all of it. To end up here with you, with this family we built, it was all worth it." Grace felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears this time. "I love you, Austin Trent, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. And I love you, Grace Trent, until my last breath and beyond." They sat together as the stars came out, the sounds of their family drifting from the house behind them. 4 children, 8 grandchildren at last count, with more likely on the way. A ranch that prospered through their hard work and smart management. A community that respected and valued them. A life built on love and trust and the courage to choose happiness over fear. When Grace finally passed away at the age of 68, she died peacefully in her sleep with Austin holding her hand. She had lived a long and happy life, had seen her children and grandchildren flourish, had experienced more joy than she ever thought possible during those dark days with Jacob. Her last thoughts were of gratitude for the cowboy who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, who had offered her hope when she thought hope was a luxury she could not afford. Austin followed her just 6 months later, his heart, the doctor said, simply giving out. But those who knew him best understood that he had died of a broken heart, unable to imagine life without the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything for nearly 40 years. They were buried side by side in the Fredericksburg cemetery, their graves marked with simple headstones. But their true memorial was the family they left behind, children and grandchildren who carried their legacy of love and courage into the future. Thomas and Sarah's children grew up hearing the story of how their grandparents had met, how Grace had been brave enough to leave an impossible situation, and Austin had been patient enough to earn her trust one gentle word at a time. The story became part of family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It was a reminder that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply refuse to give up hope. The house Austin built still stood decades later, occupied by various descendants who added their own chapters to the family story. Grace's garden continued to bloom each spring, tended by loving hands that remembered the woman who had first planted those seeds. And in the barn, hanging from a nail, was the pistol Grace had used to defend herself against Jacob, kept as a reminder that sometimes the gentlest people were also the strongest when they needed to be. The Trent family prospered in Fredericksburg, becoming respected members of the community over multiple generations. They were known for their integrity, their kindness to others, and their unwavering belief that everyone deserved a chance at happiness, no matter what their past might hold. It was a philosophy Grace and Austin had lived by, and it became their greatest gift to the future. In the end, their story was simple but profound. A woman too scared to trust had found a man patient enough to earn it. A cowboy drifting through life had found a reason to settle down. And together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of pain and fear, proving that love, when given freely and nurtured carefully, could transform lives and create legacies that lasted long after the lovers themselves were gone. Their love story became a testament to the power of gentleness over force, patience over pressure, and hope over despair. It showed that the strongest love was not the one that burned brightest and fastest, but the one that grew slowly and steadily, deepening with every shared sunrise and weathered storm. Grace and Austin had built their love one gentle word at a time, and it had proven strong enough to last a lifetime and beyond.